So our next guest is the ATT&CK Threat Intelligence Lead at the MITRE Corporation, where she focuses on applying cyber threat intelligence to attack and sharing why that's useful. With more than a dozen publications to her name, she has shared her expertise with presentations at BSides LV, the FIRST CTI Symposium, multiple SANS summits, and other events. She is also a SANS instructor for 578 Cyber Threat Intelligence and was a member of the 2019 SANS CTI Summit Advisory Board. She was the 2018 recipient of the President's Award from the Women's Society of Cyberjutsu and serves as the program manager for the Cyberjutsu Girls Academy. Here with a presentation on putting MITRE ATT&CK into action with what you have where you are. Please give a round of applause for Katie Nichols.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that intro, and thank you to Walmart for having me. This is amazing. My first time in Arkansas. Thank you to Tim, to Abby, to Ashley, to AJ, to the whole team behind the scenes organizing. This is wonderful. So I'm so happy to be here. Again, I'm Katie Nichols. I work for the MITRE Corporation. MITRE is a nonprofit that works in the public interest. And we do cool research and development projects like MITRE ATT&CK, which is what brings me here today, as well as work for the government, federal government. So really happy to be here to talk to you about MITRE ATT&CK, and not just what it is, but how you can use it, regardless of where you are. Thank you. We've all got to have a who am I slide, right? This is our attack nerding out. The attack technique that applies to who am I is system owner user discovery. So it's a little attack nerd joke for you. I'm the attack threat intelligence lead at MITRE. My side hustle is as a SANS instructor. Everyone needs their side hustle. That's mine. I love conferences. I love going out talking to people about threat intelligence, about cybersecurity. I spent my career kind of at the intersection of defense and intel, which is, I think, a really important area to focus on. I also love chocolate. So you can imagine the king-size candy bars outside there. Yeah, I'm hitting that table up quite a bit, so that's awesome. I also am really passionate about women in cybersecurity. I volunteer with a group called Cyberjutsu Girls Academy, where we try to get young women, middle school, high school girls interested in STEM. So that's a little bit about me. Also, I CrossFit. Don't worry, I won't talk to you about my workouts. And Oxford commas are the only way. So I love this quote from Theodore Roosevelt. Do what you can with what you have where you are. And I think it's so powerful for us in the cybersecurity community as well, because so often we get hung up in, well, I'm not perfect. You know, I'm not Daniel Bohannon. I didn't write invoke obfuscation. How can I ever monitor PowerShell? I'm just me, a lowly researcher. No, you have power, right? As a defender, as a red teamer, whatever you do, you have power to make security in your area better. So don't get discouraged because you're not perfect, right? No one's perfect. Otherwise, we all wouldn't be here learning. Do what you can with what you have where you are. And that's really the theme of this talk. MITRE ATT&CK is awesome, and it sounds like a lot of you have heard of it. Thanks to Jason for setting me up. But a lot of the questions we get are, well, how do I use it if I'm not some elite SOC who has 600 people? We think there's power in using MITRE ATT&CK regardless of where you are, and that's the theme for today. As we dive into what attack is, here are some of the questions we like to think about that attack can help you try to get to a better answer on. I've worked in SOCs for about 10 years now. These are some of the challenges that I've seen. How effective are my defenses, right? How do I know that? Do I have a chance at detecting APT28, Fin7, Cozy Bear, whatever the group of the day is? Is the data I'm collecting actually useful? We spend all this money, all this time bringing in these logs or buying these tools. Is that helping me be more secure? And similarly, we all have restrained budgets. Is this product going to help me get safer, improve my organization's defenses? And do those tools overlap, given those limited resources? So that brings us to what attack is. We feel like it has a lot of potential to help you in all those areas. Simply stated, attack is a knowledge base of adversary behavior. Think of it like an encyclopedia describing all the different things that adversaries can do. Some key things about attack to understand: it's based on real-world observations. We don't want attack to be this pie-in-the-sky model of proof of concept things. We really focus on things that we know adversaries are doing, or cutting-edge red teams are doing that adversaries are likely to pick up, which we've seen quite a bit. It's also free and open. That goes hand in hand with MITRE's working in the public interest. ATT&CK is free. Anyone can access it, attack.mitre.org. If you're a student, if you're a vendor, if you're an end user SOC, ATT&CK is for you. It's also a common language. So often I've seen in this community, we're on different pages, right? We're saying the same thing in different words. So ATT&CK is a great way we can come together and say, I mean this technique or this behavior when we're talking to each other. And lastly, it's community driven. We at MITRE maintain ATT&CK, but we don't have all the answers. None of us in this field do. So we rely on the community to tell us, what are you seeing about what adversaries are doing, and then add that into ATT&CK to make it better for everyone. So as we think about how ATT&CK helps us and how this behavioral detection helps us, got to bring up David Bianco's Pyramid of Pain. Has to be at every security conference, in my opinion. You get to take your shot now. It's been here. So this is all about the idea that certain things adversaries do are more or less painful for them to change, right? So take a hash value. If they change 1 bit in that hash, if we're detecting that hash and they change it, we're not going to find them, right? Similarly, IP is domains. I can probably register a new IP on my phone in 30 seconds. Takes longer than the DerbyCon tickets took to sold out, right? And moving up that pyramid, host-based artifacts or tools, that's a little more painful for the adversaries to change, right? But at the top of that pyramid, the toughest thing, the most painful thing for adversaries to change is tactics, techniques, and procedures, the behaviors that they have. And I think of this the same way, I get up every day, I brush my teeth, I drink my tea, I take the same route to work. If you told me I had to take a different route and drink coffee, I would be having a really bad day. Adversaries are human too, right? They have these behaviors. And so if we can detect their TTPs, those behaviors, we have the best chance at finding them in our networks. Another way to think about ATT&CK is a zoomed-in version of the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain or the adversary lifecycle, whatever version you choose. We have one of them up here. There are a couple parts to ATT&CK. Pre-attack covers left of exploit, as we like to say. Before the adversaries attack you, right, they have to do reconnaissance. They have to weaponize. So pre-attack is one attack matrix that covers that side. And then enterprise attack, which is what most folks are familiar with, covers how do they get in and what do they do after they've gotten in. So that's the focus there. And the idea here is that, I think that traditionally, maybe 5-10 years ago, we were focused so much on perimeter defenses. We felt like, okay, if we lock that firewall down, they're never going to get in. We know that's not realistic, right? They're getting in. It's happening. So we really need to be monitoring across this whole life cycle with the assumption there's a possibility there are adversaries in our network. So enterprise attack covers Windows, Linux, and Mac. We're strongest on Windows. That's where the most research is. So especially if there are Linux and Mac folks out there, come talk to me. I'll give you a business card. We need some help there, new contributions, new techniques. We also have a separate mobile attack that covers Android and iOS. So most folks are familiar with this matrix view of attack, which is expressing in a matrix framework form all the information that's behind it. So let's break this down. Across the top, we have what we call tactics. Those are the adversary's technical goals. Things like how do they gain initial access? How do they establish persistence? Those are tactics. There used to be 11, but just this week we added a new one. So now there are 12 in enterprise attack. Our newest one is called impact. And that focuses on integrity and availability attacks, things like data destruction, data manipulation. We had intentionally scoped attack previously to just cover that confidentiality side of the CIA triad, but we're expanding it. And now there are 12 tactics. So check out that new impact tactic if you haven't looked at attack recently. Under each of those tactics, we have what are called techniques. And that's how those goals are achieved. So let's take the initial access tactic. One technique is spear phishing with an attachment, right? Techniques, how the tactic goals are achieved. And then one level down, of course, procedures. Those are the specific technique implementations. So for example, initial access is the tactic, spear phishing attachment is the technique, and the procedure would be this group used an XLSX attachment. So attack is comprised in this matrix view, tactics across the top, techniques, and procedures. So an example, and Daniel set me up really well for this, talking about the importance of monitoring services. New service is just one of our 244 enterprise techniques in attack. We have a description, kind of what it is, basic if you don't understand it. This can be a great way to learn about different behaviors as well. The permissions that you would need to execute it, whether it applies to Windows, Linux, or Mac as platforms. Then we have a couple ideas for detection and mitigation. So attack really focuses on those adversary behaviors. Our intention isn't necessarily to describe to everyone exactly how you detect or mitigate each of these things, because that's going to depend on your environment, what works for you, right? But we give you some ideas, and we link to other reading, because there's a lot of great stuff out there in the community. We also have the data sources you might need to use to detect that technique, which I'll talk about later. And then we have examples, and of course, references back to all of the work community is doing. So to make these techniques real, make them alive, we have groups and software. So here's an example group, APT28, a Russian group. So we have a description of it. We have what we renamed as associated groups. If there are any Intel nerds in the room, this is actually a really important distinction. We used to call this aliases, but I wanted to leave it up there to make this point that, if we say, for example, Pawnstorm or Sophacy, is that really an alias for APT28? Not really. They're tracked by different companies, so no one knows exactly if those overlap. So we've changed that to associated groups, but we know the naming is tough, so we want to try to track that overlap for everyone to help out. Then the techniques that this group has used, the software they've used, and of course references back to all the great open source reporting there is. Who's contributing to attack? As I said, it is not just MITRE. We're currently up to 89 different organizations and teams and individuals who have contributed. Tim Malcolm-Better is there in the last column. Not that he's less important, it's just we have so many that it's really exciting to see. Are there any other contributors in the room? What's your name? Oh, Josh. Hey, what's up, Josh? Nice to meet you. Josh is a contributor, and we really rely on the community. So if you have ideas, if you have feedback, new techniques, things you want to see, reach out to us. We love this community around attack. We're also organizing a conference of our own, ATT&CK 2019, which will be happening in October in McLean. CFP for that opens soon, so please come chat with me about that if you want to get involved in this attack community. There are 4 key use cases that we have for attack that I'm going to be diving into today to give you some actionable steps that you can take to take back to your teams to actually do. So first off, detection, right? How do we find these adversary behaviors? Next up, assessment and engineering. How do we look across our enterprise towards that mitigation and prevention in addition to just detection? How do we plan out our scarce resources and tools? Threat intelligence, this is my favorite. How do we track what adversaries are doing so we can inform our defenders? And then adversary emulation. Thanks to Jason, your check's in the mail. I owe you a beer later for setting me up. This is a specific type of red teaming we can use. And attack can be helpful to those folks as they plan out their operations and to communicate. Those are our key use cases. So this is where our usual attack briefing ends. And a lot of people leave and they're like, okay, I think I understand this attack thing. Yeah, it's a knowledge base of adversary behavior. I can use it to do detection. But how do I do that? How do I go back and get started? So what I wanted to do today is talk you through some ideas at different levels of maturity, right? And as I was thinking about how do I, express in an icon different levels of maturity, the only thing I could think of was the 1-up icon from Mario. Any Nintendo fans in the room? Yeah, just a few. I figured. Yeah, I think in my home we have almost every Nintendo system that has ever been made. So I figured this is the perfect way to kind of designate, if you're just starting out, you get 1-up. More sophisticated, a little tougher to implement, you get 2. And for kind of the elite level, you get 3. So I wanted to walk you through, the goal here is just, regardless of where you are in your security journey, if you're 1 person in your security team, if you're 600, I think, here at Walmart InfoSec, some ideas how you can use attack. Let's dive in. First one, detection. This is probably the most common thing that we hear people use attack for. And what it's all about is looking at that post-exploit activity as well as the pre-exploit activity across that whole adversary lifecycle, right? We can't just look how they're getting in. We have to assume they might have gotten in and try to detect them there. And it really helps us move up that pyramid of pain towards those TTPs, right? Not just IPs, hashes, which have value, but trying to track those behaviors. And I think there's a lot of power in organizing your detection and what you're tracking, because then you can track things like changes over time or how you improve, which all of our executives want to know, how are we getting better? It's important that we all are kind of honest with ourselves and how we improve. So level 1 of detection, there's a lot of great work out there, folks who've already written these behavioral analytics to try to detect adversary behaviors. So awesome, use those resources and adapt them to your own environment. Just grab a few. We have one from MITRE called the Cyber Analytics Repository that we're working on updating and invigorating right now. Endgame has one. Roberto Rodriguez has his Threat Hunter playbook. There's Sigma, there's atomic threat coverage. All these things map to attack. And so you can go in and say, hey, let me try this technique. Here's an analytic. Let me see, can I adapt that with the logs that I have? One note on analytics is they're very different than kind of a traditional indicator like an IP. You're probably going to need to tune them quite a bit. So be prepared for that process. But to get started, just look at someone else's analytics, see what might apply to you. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, what is an analytic? This is one we have in CAR. Basically, reg.exe called from a command shell. Adversaries use the registry for a lot of things, adding run keys, modifying the registry, trying to hide there. So here's an example analytic that you could make. We describe what's behind this, what made us suggest this analytic, then the attack techniques that the analytic applies to, and then we have on CAR pseudocode, right? It's basically just saying if the parent is reg.exe, or the parent is command.exe, and the child is reg.exe, fire. You'd adopt this, if you have process creation events, you could adopt this if you're using Elk or Splunk or ArcSight or any log management tool. Adopt it for your own environment. Level 2 of detection, one up. Imagine the doo-doo-doo-doo noise here. Look across the different techniques and see what you might be able to detect based on data you're already collecting. Right? Some of us have a lot of logs, but we don't know. I've seen organizations that they're like, how do we hunt through this? How do we find detections? And also, just don't consider only host-based data. Attack enterprise, is really strong if you have Windows logs or endpoint host logs, but network logs can be useful too. We just released Bro-Zeek analytics actually on CAR that if you're collecting network data, you can cover some attack techniques as well. So really look at the data you have already, and that can help you figure out how to write attack detections. Some example data sources that we've mapped to techniques in attack: Windows command line, process parameters, process creation, network IDS, quite a few. If you're wondering how do we make a list of all those data sources, we have a Styx taxi-based website now. So you can we have some helper scripts. This one that's on GitHub pulls all of the data sources by techniques. So you can say, hey, if I have command line interface, which attack techniques might I be able to detect? Just choose one of those. Just choose command line. Just choose network IDS. Just choose one to start. Again, use what you have where you are. Leveling up, or however it goes. Assess across all of attack what your detection coverage is, right? This is much more mature, 244 techniques now in enterprise attack, but we've heard from organizations who've done this and they've found a ton of value. Maybe start with one tactic, right? Start with initial access, move to persistence, whatever you feel like is a higher priority for you, and start going across that whole matrix. One topic that is a hot topic of discussion in this attack community is how do you rate your detection coverage, right? So I would say choose something that works for you. Maybe it's a 1 to 5 rating. 1, we probably won't detect it at all. 5, I feel pretty good we would detect this. Low, medium, high, same kind of thing. The key here, though, is to realize that you are never going to get to 100% or perfect detection on any attack technique. Give you an example, Daniel Bohannon talked about PowerShell. For a long time today, a lot of awesome stuff that you could detect. PowerShell is one single attack technique. As soon as you think you're done, detecting PowerShell, nope, someone's going to come up with a new technique. So realize you're never going to be done, but that's not the point, right? The point isn't to be perfect. It's to get better, right? Write additional detections. Monitor those adversaries. See what they're doing that you might be able to find. I love this graphic. Credit to Red Canary and Kyle Rainey for this, describing, you think you're green, right? You think you're covered. You zoom in, it's a whole universe. So I think that graphic really describes the challenge here. So this is what it might look like. This was made in a tool called Attack Navigator, really a simple tool that is on GitHub, or you can use a hosted instance. You could go through your environment and say, red, probably wouldn't detect. We know we need to fill those. White, we're not sure. Yellow, maybe we would. Green, we feel pretty good about our detection there. So if you're more sophisticated, you have a few security people looking at your detections, this is a great thing you can do with attack. Moving on to our second use case, assessment and engineering. This is really about looking just beyond that detection, right? What else? How can we prevent? How can we mitigate? How do we look across all of our tools, across our entire environment, and how do we look forward into what tools we need, what gaps we should fill? So, again, driving those decisions about security, which is, I think, all of our jobs, right? Reporting up to our executives on the best bang for our buck. So looking at, if you have that detection map, where are your gaps? How could you fill them? Looking to that broader view of cybersecurity. Also, increasing your awareness of some things that you may just not be able to detect or mitigate. And talking and having an honest conversation with your team and your executives, there are some things that we're just going to have to accept the risk. But knowing that is going to help your organization get to a stronger security posture. So level 1 here for assessment and engineering, really focus on maybe just one log source that you want to collect, right? Especially if in that last use case detection you struggled. You said, well, we don't really have any data. Maybe you're just getting started. Maybe it's just you. Focus on maybe one thing that you think could help you out. A few places to start. Daniel gave a lot of examples of Windows event logs, PowerShell that you can find in them. There are a ton of research out there on getting started with Windows event logs. There's some great cheat sheets from Michael and the team at Malware Archaeology, including one that maps Windows event logs to attack techniques, so that could be a useful place. NCSC has this logging made easy tool on GitHub. Sysmon, it's a free tool, great way to get a lot of coverage on Windows. A lot of those things map to attack. I think the Swift on Security Sysmon config is a great one to start with. Level 2 of assessment and engineering, if you have that detection coverage map, assess beyond it, right? There's a lot of other things we could do to prevent and to mitigate a lot of those techniques beyond just detection. And don't just think of tools, right? Don't just think of something like app whitelisting or an email gateway or AV. Think policies. I strongly believe that cybersecurity is a people, process, and technology challenge. And we so often, I know I do it too, we get focused on that technology piece. And we forget the people and the process. But there are things in your organization, no other teams, know who to reach out to implement policies that are going to help you across your organization. Also, as I mentioned, some things that you may not be able to detect or mitigate, you might just have to accept that risk. So what might this look like? OK, you start out. Here's your detection map that you did in the previous use case. Spear phishing attachment. OK, we have an email gateway. We have AV. Maybe it'll detect if it drops on disk. What else could you do? User awareness program. Does anyone have one of those? That can be an incredibly valuable way that add your users in, right? Maybe they're going to still click on the link. But if you educate them, maybe they'll report it to you. Add to your detection there beyond just a tool-based approach, right? The next one, example here of looking beyond just detection, supply chain compromise. This is a really tough technique. Think back to the Ukraine attack, ME/DOC, that whole mess. Or think of people putting chips in the plant where your computers are getting manufactured. That is tough to detect. So depending on your maturity, this might be one that you say, you know what, we do not have the resources. This is not the low-hanging fruit. At this time, in our organization's maturity, this is not a priority for us. And just having that honest conversation and knowing what you don't know. Leveling up assessment and engineering, planning out your whole strategy for what tools you're going to acquire, for what gaps you're going to fill over time, right? So what we can do is, with our existing tools, talk to vendors if you have vendor tools, talk to the community, look at open source research. There's so many great researchers in this community who will help you out, right? If you're trying to configure Windows logs, figure out what works. There's a lot of great people who will help you. With vendor tools, think about what you can change, right? Is there a configuration setting you could flip? And then, wow, you get a ton of visibility. PowerShell script block logging. If you turn that on, what would that do to your coverage? So also examining your security budget beyond just where you are now. How much money do we have in the next 5 years? And what are our priorities? So what could that look like? OK, this is where we are. This is our detection map. What if we collected new Windows logs? We add a bunch of detections or mitigations, right? Maybe we could find those techniques that we didn't have before. Next from there, let's look to 2020. Adding more coverage, right? More detection. In 2020, we can maybe afford an EDR tool that will let us improve. So assessment and engineering is really about looking at where you are and figuring out where you want to go and making informed decisions about that. Next one, threat intelligence. This is the good stuff. This is my favorite section. This is what I've been waiting for. I'm so passionate about threat intelligence and how watching our adversaries informs defense. And I think there's a lot of value there, and I hope you think that as well. So what we're talking about here is really using what those behaviors are that we know adversaries are doing and informing our defenders, right? I think that one of the challenges and one of the reasons we've relied so much on things like IPs and hashes for what we call threat intelligence is that it's countable. The great thing about structuring your intel with attack is it's structured and then it's countable, right? You can track your improvement over time. You can track adversaries, how they're changing over time, how they compare to each other, how do they compare to your defenses. You can also communicate, right? So often, threat analysts will say, oh, here's what the adversary is doing, and the defenders might be like, what are you talking about? Oh, you're talking about that attack technique? Great. If you're all speaking the same language, that common language of attack, much easier for your teams to communicate about what they're doing. So level 1 for threat intelligence, choose a single group you care about. APT28, maybe Fin7 if you're a large retail organization with POS systems. Choose one group, start small. There are quite a few threat intelligence providers and services that map to attack. It used to be that I listed them because there was only one or two. Now, almost everyone's doing it, which is great to see. So you can talk to if you have a threat intelligence subscription you use, or just use our website. We're up to 86 different groups that we've mapped on our website. It's from solely public open source reporting, but it's a place to start, right? Take a look at what those techniques are that they're doing. And then make recommendations to your defenders. So for example, spear phishing attachment, going back to that technique, Cobalt Group has used spear phishing attachment. They've used RTF, DOC, and XLS attachments. So what you can do is then take that to your defenders and say, hey, can we even capture these attachment types? We have some ideas for mitigation on our website, right? Take those mitigation ideas. Say, hey, would any of these work? Because we know this group is using this technique. Or how could we detect it? Could we add a rule to look for those file types? Or look for those file types to multiple people? Trying to inform your defenders based on what the adversaries are doing. Level up in threat intelligence. Map your own threat intelligence to attack. Don't just take what we're doing on the MITRE team or what a vendor gives you. Start with maybe one group you care about, one malware sample. If you have an incident report or some threat intelligence that your team has produced, map those behaviors to attack and see how it goes. This is something you want to do, some tips to get started. Think about how you store that. A lot of tips are accommodating attack now, or you can just use Excel, which is the best threat intelligence tool of all time. If you do this, start at the tactic level. It can be overwhelming, those 244 techniques, right? So if you have a behavior and you say, hey, I know this is persistence, great. Start at persistence and then figure out the technique. Use our website. We have a lot of examples to guide you as you do this, and work as a team. So often as I'm looking through reporting, I say, I found these 8 attack techniques. I tweeted today, and Daniel, one of his slides, I saw 8 attack techniques. Well, my colleague came back to me and said, oh, I found 9. Cool. Work together because as analysts, we have different biases, right? We see different things. And use those detection and mitigation recommendations based on the adversary behaviors that you know from your own threat intelligence, your own incidents, to inform better security policies. So I'd like to walk through what this looks like. How do you map to attack? So this is a report from the NCC group. And just walking through and thinking about, I've highlighted in yellow the behaviors that are here. And then we're going to map those to attack techniques. Wait for it. Creating batch scripts, that's a scripting technique. Windows run key, really common persistence technique. Windows commands, command line interface is an incredibly common execution technique. Then we have a series of discovery techniques, right? Really common for adversaries to get on your box. They have to figure out what processes are running, what network connections are there, what other systems can they access. So those are common techniques. Credential dumping, another common one. Kerberos golden tickets, another one. A lot of red teamers seem to love this one as well as adversaries. And then key logging, we classify that as input capture. And then email collection, dumping data from Exchange servers or mailboxes. So initially, maybe you looked at this report and you said, well, there's no IPs or domains or hashes. What can I detect? We have all these different behaviors, these attack techniques that we can try to detect that we know adversaries are doing. So the third level of threat intelligence, map more of your threat intelligence to attack, right? Don't just focus on one group, one incident report. As a whole team, sit down and map maybe all of your historical reporting. Bring in, if you have a threat intel subscription, Maybe you have real-time alerting from one of your tools that'll alert you to attack techniques. Bring in all of that together, and then what you can do that's pretty cool is prioritize those techniques that adversaries are frequently using. It's important to remember as you do this that there's inherently going to be bias in that process, right? What the most frequent technique is depends on what you're collecting. But what we're doing here is we're prioritizing what we know over what we don't know. So I think there's value in prioritizing those frequently used techniques, even though the data is somewhat biased, which we have to admit. There's a whole presentation you can track about that. And then after you've collected all this great intel, use it and share it. You can do things like tracking adversary behavior, group behavior over time, share it out with others. You know, are my top 20 techniques the same as your top 20 techniques? Let's share and find out. So what this might look like in a matrix view, because this is my favorite thing to do, is use the attack navigator to visualize things. So up here in yellow, we have APT-28 techniques that we've seen just based on open source reporting this group do. And then in blue, APT-29, 2 different Russian groups. What we can do, since this intel is structured, overlay the 2. And in green, we have the techniques that we know these 2 groups are both doing. To me, that's a great place to prioritize, right? If based on your organization's threat model, these are important to you, prioritize those green techniques. From there, you can go a step further, because it's all structured in attack. Remember that detection, that red, yellow, green from earlier? Threat intel, talk to your detection team and figure out what are the adversaries doing and what can't we detect. That is a darn good place to start, in my opinion. And so these are the top 20 techniques based solely on the open source reporting that we've mapped as an attack team. Again, this data is biased, but it's a really good place to start. And these probably aren't a huge surprise to a lot of you, right? PowerShell is up there. Things like standard application layer protocol, which would be just C2 over HTTP. A lot of those common techniques can be a great place to start as you're tracking adversary behaviors and trying to figure out what are the common things our adversaries are doing that we should be able to detect and mitigate. Last use case, and thank you so much to Jason for setting me up for this, adversary emulation. So we have this challenge, right? As defenders, as threat analysts, we think that we're good and we think our detections will work, but how do we actually know? This is where red teamers come in, right? Because we don't know if there's an adversary in our environment or not, so red teamers can help emulate that adversary and help us know if our detections are really working. So attack is a great way that you can organize red team plans. I like to say that red teamers actually, I think, are the reason that people know about attack. You know, when we first released publicly in 2015, it was like 3 red teamers who thought it was cool, and they just told everyone. And now we're where we are today with all of you who are interested in attack and interested in using it, right? And we talk about adversary emulation with our team. It's really, we describe this as a particular type of red teaming. That's red teaming, security testing is a broad area. With adversary emulation, we're really referring to mimicking a specific group or adversary. What are the techniques and behaviors that they're doing? And obviously, as a threat intel nerd, I think there's a lot of importance in this, right? Because we can emulate a group we actually care about. So level 1 adversary emulation, no red team, no problem. If you're a defender, try out some of these red team tools. There are a lot of automated red teaming tools. I listed a bunch of them here. At the MITRE side, we just released version 2.0 of Caldera, an automated red team tool that maps to attack. That's one you can use. The team at Uber has the Meta tool. At Endgame has red team automation. There's also Red Canary's Atomic Red Team, which is an awesome way to get started. Just really simple tests you can run through a command line or small scriptlets. Here's an example of system service discovery. I know Red Canary is here today. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk more about this, but these are all open, really easy way to get started. And kind of, if you're a defender, you don't have a red team, dip your toe into red teaming, right? See, you wrote a detection maybe for an attack technique. Try out an atomic red team script to see if you can detect it. A level up for adversary emulation. Use attack, and this is all what Jason was talking about, right? To mature that purple team type of feel, to establish that communication between your red team and blue team in a real purple team, mature environment. Bring in those intel analysts as well, right? Include them in the conversation between your blue and red. And one thing I'd like to recommend that I heard one team did was they chose a different attack technique every week. Maybe your red team's just getting started out, you're not really sure what to do. Choose an attack technique that week. Get everyone in the room, blue team, red team, threat intel. Talk about what have we seen adversaries use this for? Red team, how would we emulate this? Blue team, how would we detect this? And that's a way you can kind of as across your SOC, across your InfoSec team, use ATT&CK together. And really, in this level 2, we're talking about the human operators on that red team doing adversary emulation. So one resource to point to is our adversary emulation plans. In MITRE, we've released one on APT3. And there's this field manual that we've heard from quite a few people has been useful. So have your newer red teamers go in here and say, OK, for this technique, system owner user discovery, how might I emulate that in built-in Windows? OK, who am I? In Cobalt Strike, in Metasploit, and what does that actually do? So again, bringing in those humans to do the adversary emulation, up from that level 1 of using an automated tool, bring the humans in. Level 3, develop your own adversary emulation plan. This is for a mature red team who is really doing dedicated operations against your environment. Choose an adversary along with your threat intel analysts, of course. You should always work together with them. Figure out what group you might care about. Map their techniques, map their behaviors, plan out using ATT&CK exactly what you're going to do. And then the great thing, after that operation is over, you can bring up that attack matrix and say, here's what we did. Blue team, out of that, what did you detect? And that type of red team, blue team collaboration, that's actually how ATT&CK started. Out of a project in our Maryland site, the red team was trying to communicate back to the blue team about what they'd done. And they found something like the cyber kill chain wasn't quite detailed enough to get to that solid communication. So that's how ATT&CK was born. And so you can use ATT&CK in that way to communicate back from your red team who's created this adversary emulation plan to your blue team. We have a lot more presentations and information if you want to do that kind of planning. Happy to chat with folks over a beer today as well. So bringing it all together. And I felt like the superstar was an appropriate way to kind of wrap it up, that across your teams, if you're all mapping to ATT&CK, here's what might be possible, and here's how you'd walk through this. Threat intel, right? What are the techniques our adversaries are using? Let's take a group or a few groups. Let's prioritize that. The red techniques, what are the adversaries doing that we care about? From there, taking those techniques, pass them to your detection team. How do we detect these, right? These are the ones we care about, says the threat intel team. Detection, defenders, how do we write detections to find those? Then taking the next step. What else can we do? What other tools can we acquire? How can we mitigate in addition to detecting? Doing that assessment and engineering and that planning across your environment. And then from there, red teamers come in. You think you know what you're doing. They say, nope, you cannot detect these ones. That's OK. Again, purple teams, it's meant to improve the defenses, right? It's not a gotcha thing, as Jason said. But red team pointing out where the gaps are and then going back through that process, iterating and improving what you're doing to up your game in security. That's what it's all about. And a disclaimer, though there's a superstar there, if you do this, it will not make you invincible against adversaries. That is unrealistic. But I like the superstar, so I put it there. As we start to wrap up, here's what I want to leave you with. ATT&CK is a really useful tool. It's an adversary knowledge base, an encyclopedia of what they can do. And you can use it regardless of whether you're at a 1-up level or you're at a superstar level. You can take really basic steps to try to look at what those adversaries are doing and apply that to your defenses to improve them. So I hope everyone will leave today. Maybe there's 1 or 2 things you could do in your organization. Maybe you're not going to get to the coverage map of the entire matrix, and that's OK. But there are places you can start if you want to get started using ATT&CK. Again, do what you can with what you have where you are. I love that Theodore Roosevelt quote. Don't get stuck up. Don't get stuck on if you aren't perfect, right? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. And choose a starting point that works for your team to build towards that threat-informed defense. So that is all I have. I suspect that we might have a few minutes for questions.
Do we have any questions? There's one.
Also, I have ATT&CK stickers, so come see me later.
What do you find the best way to track? I saw you mentioned Excel earlier, but what do you find most people are using to track the various techniques across tools and the content across all their different tools, from their EDR tools to their SIM to their behavioral analysis tools, and you got all the different things that you might have for a certain technique. What do you find the best way to track all of that?
Yeah, I'll be totally honest in that I don't think I've seen a perfect way to do it. Some people are using ATT&CK Navigator, which I brought up. You can kind of put scores and do overlays of the Navigator layers. Some people are using Excel. Some people are using homegrown tools. MISP supports ATT&CK, Atomic Threat Coverage. There are a few other GitHub tools. One is detect with an ampersand, I think. So there are a few tools out there. Atomic threat coverage, another one. I don't think any is the best, right? So it kind of depends on what tools you're using. And I really think this is an area where the community is trying to figure it out right now. So I know it's a really unsatisfying answer, but there are a couple tools out there that I can point you to. But I don't think there's a best way yet. Hopefully we'll figure it out soon, though.
Hi. Just curious, how many of you have heard of MITRE ATT&CK before today? How many of you, this is brand new? Huh?
We got a few, yay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I saw that you mentioned behavior analytics in the tracking system. So is there any particular theory or math issue you particularly follow, or there is no proper way when you track a attack, or kind of like in a social engineering perspective, but the behavior analytics plays a vital role?
So you're asking kind of what's the best way to track behavioral analytics?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, similar to the last question. Yeah, you could use something simple like Excel, like one of the GitHub tools. It's not that easy. You could use kind of a rating scale for your confidence about detection. A lot of different ways you could do that.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I was just curious, since MITRE manages CVE as well, do you guys have any plans to integrate attack so that you can correlate, for example, new exploits or things like that to techniques that you would expect in the future a group might exploit this particular flaw?
Yeah, good question. We don't have any plans right now to map attack to CVE or anything like that because they're inherently different, right? CVE tracks on what those vulnerabilities are so you can patch them. Attack's about the behaviors. That said, we do have exploitation of techniques in attack, and that's where kind of some of that CVE stuff might map. So you could do something like, say, exploitation for privilege escalation is a technique. So then under that, mapping the CVEs that adversaries are using that you care about is a way to kind of prioritize that patching. But on the MITRE side, they're kind of different projects with different goals. So no plans right now to map across those, but good question.
Cool. Do we have any other questions today?
Cool.
All right, let's give Katie a round of applause. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
all.
Yeah, thanks for coming. You can sit right there.